All right, y'all, thanks for coming out. Last time we ended with this strengthening papacy. We're in the 11th century, and the papacy had just sort of fallen into weakness. They were being dominated by the political rulers, and then the popes were rediscovering the power of excommunication, and that kings feared it. And so they wielded that power, but tonight we're going to see a strengthening of that as we move into an even greater consolidation of that power of the Pope. So Europe was ruled by these clusters of kings. Remember, we've got the Holy Roman Empire, so they've got these different clusters of kings and their lands, and there's all, we've got this feudalism, and so you've got the lords and the earls, and you got all these different layers of nobility, and while this is happening, so they're all sort of fractured. So the Roman Church, we're going to see, starts coming more together. And there was a pope named Innocent III. Yes, you got to be pretty bold to take that name for yourself, Innocent. Yeah, and he was the third. And he ushered in a new kind of leadership. So up to this point, the popes had predominantly been monks. They had gone to the monasteries. They had gone to the abbeys to find their popes, because what they were looking for is a piety and a devotion to spiritual matters. But now they're not going to be the monks anymore. The popes are going to be the intellectuals and the academics. They're going to be experts in church law, because they're about to start lowering the hammer when it comes to church law. This is also when this pope declared, and I quote, "The successor of Peter is the vicar of Christ. He has been established as mediator between God and man, below God, but beyond man." Now, this is the first time we're hearing something like this articulated about a human being. Below God, but above man. Less than God, but more than man. Who shall judge all and be judged by no one. So, can you get the idea where it comes from? How many of you grew up here when you meet St. Peter at the pearly gates? So it comes from this idea. Peter is going to determine who's saved and who's not. Peter's going to determine who gets in and who doesn't get in, because he is below God, but he is above man in their eyes. By the way, Peter's preeminence, that he is literally preeminent, was never made official doctrine until 1870. Doesn't mean they weren't believing that, but it was never official doctrine. So Innocent tells all the rulers, all the kings, all the nobles, that the Pope is like the sun, and the kings are like the moon. As the moon received light from the sun, the kings only received their power from the Pope. Can you see that tension increasing now between the political rulers and the religious rulers? So the Pope has something the kings don't have. The Pope's got the power of heaven and hell, as he has declared for himself. And excommunication was a fierce weapon. But there was another weapon they had called interdict. An interdict was where they could excommunicate an entire state, an entire country, an entire region. And when a pope issued an interdict, that meant no church in that country was allowed to have worship services. Every priest was declared as not having any authority. And this guy, Innocent, applied or threatened to interdict 85 times. One time he did was in England. King John disagreed with Innocent over the election of the Archbishop of Canterbury. So he placed England under interdict and excommunicated King John. So John said, "How do I get out of this?" And they came to a deal where for the rest of his life, John had to pay money monthly to the Pope to keep England out of interdict. So you see how the popes not only have power now, they're getting rich, because that's how you can buy your way out of trouble. In France, he forced King Philip Augustus to take back the wife he divorced under threat of interdict. He said he would he'd place interdict on France unless he took back his wife. So the papacy and the church were taken to new heights. Their buildings reflected. I'm going to show you just a couple of the buildings and talk about their architecture in a minute. But let's consider some background to what's going on here. So Islam. Islam officially began with Muhammad's first vision in the year 610. But after Muhammad's death, there was a lot of conflict within Islam because they had battles. And there are many, many different branches of Islam. In fact, I find it interesting when Muslims criticize Christians for having all our denominations because we're not unified. They're not unified. But the major division that happened first was over who's going to be the successor. So the Sunnis believed whoever the successor was to Muhammad and the future caliphs should be elected. But the Shiites said, no, it has to be a descendant of Muhammad's bloodline. And I believe that's still the case today, isn't it? The difference between those lands. So in the first 100 years of Islam, Jerusalem, Cairo, and Damascus all fell under their control. But there was a bit of a détente. I mean, they went and took these regions, but Christians could still take their pilgrimages there. So they were letting Christian pilgrims go and visit the birthplace of Jesus and things like this, and it was very popular to do that. And by the 8th century, half of all Christians lived under Islamic rule. Think about that. Half of all Christians lived under Islam. Nevertheless, the Christians took these pilgrimages, and the thing is, the Muslims at that time were more entrenched in their internal divisions, and they were killing each other. And that all changed though in the 11th century when they started persecuting the Christians. The Christians would go on their pilgrimages, and the Muslims would start killing them. They were no longer content just to conquer. They set out to rule the world at this point. And in the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks began attacking and plundering. I mean, they just go on this bloodthirsty rampage, and they violently took over Jerusalem and Asia Minor from fellow Muslims. And they are using the sword to convert, and anybody that didn't convert, they killed. So in 1095, Pope Urban launched an effort to take back the Christian lands. What do we call those? Crusades. That's exactly right. And you can see here the Crusades ran just under 200 years. There were 7 official crusades issued by the popes. Who knows what the word crusade means? Holy war. Nope. Crusade means taking the cross. Taking the cross. And when the Crusaders would go into battle, they wore the crosses on the front. And when they were returning home, they put their crosses on the back. That's trivial, but anyway. The purpose of the Crusades was to regain lands that had been taken. Primarily, they first went to regain the Holy Land, and they were launched as an act of justice to defend life and property, the life and property of Christians. The Crusaders were given strict instruction to respect all non-combatants and to treat with respect all hostages and prisoners. So when the Christians launched these crusades, I know the world likes to say they went on these bloodthirsty rampages, and hold on, I'm not going to whitewash it for you. There was some bad stuff done. But the purpose of these was to be an act of justice and to treat those who weren't at war with them with decency and respect. But as we all know, humans are human. So some of these crusaders were bloodthirsty, and they went from just liberating the Holy Lands to defeating the Muslims. There were 7 major crusades. The first one recaptured Jerusalem and part of the Jewish territories. And the last one ended in 1291 when Acre, which is in Israel, fell to the Muslims. Pope Urban also decreed that all crusaders with pure devotion had full remission of sins. So if you go on a crusade, all your sins are forgiven. if you have pure devotion, if your heart is right. They got a plenary indulgence. Now remember, the indulgences, we'll talk more about that when we get to the Protestant Reformation, but the indulgences, the Catholics believe that when you die, it's not just heaven or hell necessarily, that if you're not going to hell, if you're not one of the worst people, then you get to go to purgatory. If you are a Catholic, you get to go to purgatory, where you have to atone for the sins your good works did not atone for while you were on earth. And so basically an indulgence is a way to skip purgatory and you get to go straight to heaven. Interestingly, the rich men could pay somebody to go on their behalf on these crusades, so they didn't have to. In 1187, Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, proclaimed a jihad. But interestingly, he said, don't shed any innocent blood. So his jihad was just to go after the combatants. But now here what we have is the Muslims, since jihad was proclaimed, if a Muslim dies in jihad, their salvation is secured. So now we got two sides believing that they can go to war to attain their salvation. What could go wrong? But it's against this backdrop, again, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, that the Christians started building these magnificent churches. Part of this is staking claim on a place. This is a Christian place. And the popes were trying to increase the majesty of the church through military might and these big churches. The thing is, they were building all these big churches, and a lot of times they just cracked and fell under their own weight, because the architecture, in a lot of ways, the engineering hadn't caught up with the designs. And it's kind of symbolic, because that's what happened to the papacy, to the popes as well. The Crusaders forgot two things in a lot of ways. Number one, Christianity is not linked to special places. So they're going to go back and take the holy sites. We're not linked to any locations. Those places are cool. I've been there. But there's nothing you gain spiritually from being in a certain place. Second is that Christianity is never advanced by the sword or by any political means. So what I want to do is just talk. I've got a few things. I was going to put a chart up here, and my chart just fell to pieces when I tried to convert it. So just listen to the chart in your mind. I'm going to give you, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways the Crusades and Islamic Jihad are different. And the reason I want to do this is because how many times have you heard that most of the religions in the world have been caused by religion? Well, that's actually demonstrably, statistically false, significant. Most of the wars and deaths by violent governments have been by, you look at the Soviets, you look at the North Koreans, you look at China, you look at, Pol Pot and his regime, and it's atheistic. Much of it is atheistic. And of the religious wars, only a tiny fraction will you ever see Christians on the offensive. But our world likes to say religion causes war, and the Christians are just as bad as the Muslims. Just look at the Crusades. There were a lot of atrocities committed in the Crusades. There was a lot of good done in the Crusades, but you send a bunch of guys to war and tell them, but be good about it. And it's just not always going to go well, especially when you're going to war and you're earning your salvation. You have God's blessing on whatever you do. So I want to give you 5 ways that we compare and contrast Christianity and the Crusades and jihad. Okay? Number 1, Jesus laid down his life and prayed for his enemies. Therefore, killing others is the opposite of the life of Jesus. Jesus never did that. Jesus didn't kill people. On the other hand, Muhammad killed his enemies. He didn't die for his enemies. He didn't pray for his enemies. He killed his enemies. Islamic terrorism today is patterned after the life of the founder of Islam. Number 2, Jesus commanded us to love our enemies, to lay down our lives, to serve others, and to share the gospel. Therefore, any forced conversions or killing of unbelievers is actually disobeying the teachings of Jesus. Muhammad called for the forced conversion or slaughter of those who were not Muslims. Therefore, killing to advance Islam is obedience to its teaching. So yes, have Christians killed in the name of Christianity? They have, in violation of the teachings of Jesus. Have Muslims killed in the name of Islam? They have, in keeping with the teachings and the behavior of Muhammad. Number 3, the Crusades were never launched for forced conversions or advancing Christianity. When they went back to take lands, they were under specific instructions to allow the Muslims to practice their religion. It's like, go take Jerusalem, but leave the Muslims alone. If they're not warring with you, leave them alone. Jihad and Islamic terrorism are about the militant advancement of Islam. Number 4, the Crusades were primarily defensive in nature. Lands had been taken from Christians. Christians had been killed. They're going to set these people free. Islamic jihad and terrorism are offensive in nature. And then finally, it's true some crusaders committed atrocities, but most of them did not. When you hear that it was just all bad, it's actually a small percentage of the crusaders that were doing these bad things. And those that did bad things were condemned by Christians. When they got home, they were excommunicated. So it wasn't like they got home and everybody said, hey, it's all fair in love and war. No, if it was found out that they did this stuff, they were actually excommunicated, and they have been seen through history as violating the Christian ethic. Jihad and Islamic terrorism have as their purpose the torture and killing of innocents. And they're celebrated. Y'all remember after 9/11, seeing these countries where the Muslims are dancing in the streets and just celebrating 3,500 innocent civilians killed. And that's not something that we as Christians do. So, I just want to show you a couple pictures that I have here, and we're going to move on to sort of this next phase. But you start seeing churches like this being built. This is Reims Cathedral in France. This is what you call a Gothic-style architecture. This was built between 1170 and 1270. It took 100 years to build that church. I mean, it's magnificent, isn't it? It's incredible. There are over 500 churches built in this style in France alone. Yeah. Wonder if anybody recognizes this one. Huh? That's exactly right. That is Notre Dame Cathedral in France, not to be confused with Notre Dame College. Took 182 years to build it. Can you imagine? I mean, you could be a builder and your great grandkids might see it finished. Might. Actually, with life expectancy back then, probably not. Between 1163 and 1345. And you see, I'm sorry this is here. I don't know why. But we share rooms here. But I don't know if you can see these things coming off. Does anybody know what those are called? That's called the flying buttress. And so that was one way to keep these walls from falling outward with the weight of the roof on them, as they put these flying buttresses up there. And anyway, here's another. It's really remarkable, isn't it? 182 years. And so what they're doing is they're building higher and higher. And there's a lot of symbolism. I mean, everything points heavenward. And these churches were designed that when you walk in the door, have you ever been in any of these kind of churches? Yeah. You walk in the door and what do? You look up. Frankly, I think we're missing that in a lot of churches today. You know, I like the idea of drawing heavenward. The symbolism is really man reaching heavenward. But I love this. This is inside of Notre Dame. Yeah, do y'all love stained glass? I love it. I don't think it's stained glass. I think it may be painted glass. But y'all ever drive by Green Acres Baptist Church at night? And it's a magnificent window. Do y'all know if that's stained or painted? Because stained glass, if it's stained, that could be several $100,000 window right there. I don't know. But it's got portraits of saints and biblical figures. And why did they put the stained glass? Why did they didn't just make art out of it. Why did they put these different people and whatnot in their stained glass?
Storytelling.
It's storytelling. Every bit of stained glass told a story. These were illiterate people. So they actually used the stained glass to tell the stories of the life of Christ and the early church and of the saints of old. And the light coming through symbolizes the light of God shining on His people. And it's really magnificent. But part of it was they're trying really hard, and this comes into what we're going to be talking about next and into next week. They're trying to create this perfect society. They're trying to create a utopia, a Christian utopia. And hasn't that been what humans have been trying to do for since there have been humans? Is trying to create this perfect world. And one way they wanted to do that is by creating these heavenly spaces with a sense of holiness and a sense of, and really, when you walk in, like, we go into these churches in Germany that are 500, 600, 700 years old, and you'll be chatting and everything, and you walk in and you just get quiet. Because there's a sense of reverence about it. There's a holiness to it. Again, there's nothing, you don't get any salvation out of the spaces. But I don't think there's anything wrong with building things to honor God. Something truly wonderful did arise from what's going on here. So here's the thing we need to remember in history. You know, we tend to think about good people and bad people. And don't get me wrong, there are some really great people and there are some really evil people in history. We talk about good events, bad, like the Crusades. You know, there was some good that came from that. There was some bad that came from that. Most things and most people, most events, most areas are a mixed bag. And so you get some bad stuff coming out of this area. I'm talking like this 11th through 14th century era. But you've got some good stuff happening. And one thing that we saw arise here was scholasticism. And you say, well, Mike, there was always academics. Yeah, but there's something different going on now. God had revealed Himself to man through His creation. And now there's this idea that man needs to understand that revelation. That by studying the world and the universe, you can learn about God. There's also this idea that the revelation of God must be seen in light of human knowledge. In other words, human knowledge is a good thing. Let's use it. So the ancients, or the academics of the first few centuries, were focused on learning theology proper. You got these guys like Augustine and others that, Anselm, that are just these intellectual powerhouses, and they're writing these theological tomes, and they're giving these lectures, and they're just speaking about God so beautifully. They study the scriptures and they study the writings, and it's really good stuff. And that was really important in the early days of the church. Why? How long did it take for false teaching to start coming into the church? 5 minutes, right? I mean, what are most of Paul's letters? Yeah. He's saying, dear church and so, I love you. What were you thinking? I mean, isn't that the way they go? Straighten up. I mean, he says to the Galatians, who has bewitched you? So we needed the theologians proper. And we needed the church councils to defend the faith from the heretics. And they did it in proper ways. They didn't do it with violence. They did it in ways that they said, hey, we're going to get together, we're going to discuss these, we're going to write, we're going to study Scripture, and we're going to systematize our theologies. But this new focus now is on theology, but not only theology. It's on all areas of learning, and it gave rise to schools in the cathedrals. This is where the schools started. What were they called? Universities. They were established to study God, but not just studying theology proper. Everything. It was the intersection of theology and human reason. God was seen as the source of all truth. So they're thinking, how can human reason be used to understand God better? How could the things of God be systematized in an orderly fashion? Since God was the source of all truth, all learning would reveal more about God. I mean, they literally, whatever you're studying, if it's true, it comes from God. And therefore, by knowing truth, you can know God better. They studied the 7 liberal arts: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. All those are considered liberal arts. I don't think we put math under liberal arts anymore, do we? Is that still considered a liberal art, Tam?
Yeah.
She's our academician. Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Would astronomy, though?
About liberal arts as being more of your English and history,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. But in a lot of schools, they put those all together
Okay.
in one college and call it the College of Liberal Arts.
Okay, good to know. But here's why they became called liberal arts. In ancient Rome, all study of any academic pursuit was limited to a group of people called the liberi. What does that mean? Free men. And by the way, not free men and women, free men. And they had some Christian academics, Cassiodicius, Augustine, Gregory the Great, and so forth. But when they're studying Plato and philosophy and all that, the education was limited to free men, the liberi. So now the idea is that we are all free to learn. We're going to be free to learn. Teachers really became the rock stars of the day. They were highly respected and esteemed. I mean, they were the celebrities. And, they wore their special robes, and they had the ears of the popes and of the kings, and they dined with the greats. They were highly respected. And just a couple of the most notable ones are, there's a guy named Gerbert of Aurillac, France. And he would later become Pope Sylvester II. As a young monk, his abbot was so impressed with him, he sent him to Spain to study math. If you can come up with the why on this one, you get extra credit tonight. It ties into our last lesson. Why Spain? What's going on in Spain? Who? And who are the Moors? And what are they known for? Early advancements in mathematics.
What does he get?
Huh?
What does he get?
Extra credit. You get 10 extra points. The points are made up and they mean nothing, so. But you get 10. You have 50. Whose line is it anyway? There are no rules and the points don't matter. That was the way they did that. So he sends him to Spain to study math, and there he's exposed to math and other things, and he's so impressed, he starts saying, hey, we need to include works of even non-Christians, because there are other people out there who are smart in some of these liberal arts that have something to offer, and he argued all truth is God's truth. Wherever it comes, whoever discovers it. So he began collecting Roman classics and amassed this huge library. And the amazing thing about that is one manuscript. Who was asking me about the Bibles back then? Was that you, David? A manuscript of a book could cost the annual income of a churchman. So to have a library was a big deal. And one book could take up to a year to copy. Now I want you to think about that. When you think about the over 30,000 New Testament manuscripts that are out there that are written by hand. It's pretty impressive the way they did that, and the consistency and the accuracy with which they did it. Another one of these guys was Peter Abelard, another Frenchman. He was born into a wealthy family, but he gave his inheritance to his brothers so that he could go around France and sit at the feet of the masters. And he would engage them and even challenge them. So he would come, typically the masters, they would have their students, and they would teach them and they would lecture, and he would interrupt them. He just had this inquisitive mind. And he eventually became a lecturer in Paris and began to write. And he just so valued questioning everything. Question everything. Ask questions. He said this, quote, "The first key to wisdom is assiduous and frequent questioning. For by doubting we come to inquiry, and by inquiry we arrive at the truth." And that's why I'm all the time encouraging questions, doubts. Let's get them out there, because that is how you're going to learn things. Church leaders hated him. They hated him because he asked questions. So they forced him to go live in a monastery. But somehow, I couldn't find out how, he secured his release a year later and lived in the wilderness outside Paris. And so students would flock to him. They went and found him out in the woods. And they would go to him and they would sit at his feet. They built him shelter. They tilled his land and they begged him to teach them. And he did. But one of the leaders, Bernard of Clairvaux, opposed him so vigorously, he had him condemned for heresy. Not because he believed heretical teachings, but because he questioned the church. And that was not going to be allowed. He lived the rest of his life in seclusion, and after he died, the church dropped the charges of heresy. Interestingly, and by the way, we would not agree with the stuff he believes. In fact, one of his beliefs that he wrote about, people worried about their unbaptized infants who died. So he came along and said, okay, if they're infants, they have a sin nature, but they haven't committed sins yet. Therefore, they won't be condemned for any sins. But they've also not been baptized, so they can't go to heaven. And so he was kind of nebulous about, well, where they are. Who knows the church teaching that arose from this? Limbo. That the babies who die in infancy, unbaptized, they're just out there. It's neither heaven nor hell. Their souls are just in limbo. Interesting story. I have a good friend, was a good friend of ours in Maryland, who is pretty interesting because he was raised Catholic, and he and his wife gave birth to their first child, and at the hospital he just got panicked. I got to get a priest here. I got to get this child baptized. What if something happens? So they left the hospital, and on the way home from the hospital, they stopped by the church. And he went in and found the priest, and he said, you need to baptize this baby. And the priest's like, well, I'm not going to do it right now. And he said, but you've got to baptize my baby. I don't want my baby dying and going to limbo. And he says, oh, we don't believe that anymore. So I don't really know what the church's official position, but that's the day my friend left the Catholic Church. He was like, well, if they're just going to change that on me, I got to figure out the truth. And anyway, he ended up becoming a Christian later. So now these teachers have all these followings, and they would band together, and the universities are being established at a rapid rate, because once people learn once people discover that they can learn things, what do they want? They want to learn things. And when you learn some things, you want to learn more things. And so that's why I say this is something great that came out of this period. And so these groups of scholars would establish these universities. Initially, they gave lectures in the open areas like fields and town squares. Sometimes they met in sheds. And then they started renting rooms with students on the floor before they actually started building university buildings. In addition to the lectures, they would have disputations. Someone would read a text and the questions would fly. Whether it be a biblical text or some other writing about something. And sometimes they would have these heated public debates with cheering and whistling and stomping, and the church hated it. Why? Because even church teachings were being questioned. They would say, you have to be baptized, and somebody would say, why? Well, the church is the only means of salvation. Why? Well, Peter is preeminent. Why? And what's the problem? When your answers are not grounded in truth, your answers aren't going to satisfy people. And that creates a problem. Students were being taught to think, and that was a dangerous thing. This is why cults don't allow questioning. I think I've told y'all about this before, but if you're interested in something like this, there is a mini-series, I don't know if they still call them that, on Netflix called Under the Banner of Heaven. And it's a true story, Under the Banner of Heaven. It's a true story. Now I'm going to tell you, because it's a true story and it's about these Mormon murders in Utah in the 80s, there's a little bit of language, and I mean a very little bit, but there is a little bit of language in it. But it tells the true story of these Mormon murders, and one of the things it does is they flash back to the days of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. And one of the things that's very accurate in there is one of the characters starts having questions. So he goes to his bishop, and he lays his questions out. And the bishop says, "We put those questions on a shelf. Carry on." What they mean is, we're just going to shelve that and not talk about it. He says, you just need to take the church's word for it. And this is why the Mormon church is bleeding members right now, by the way. The internet has prevented them from doing that a lot. But they still use that term, put them on a shelf. Thinking's dangerous. So here we are getting into like the 13th, 14th century. People are starting to ask questions. People are starting to think. What is this starting to lay the very beginning foundation for? The Protestant Reformation. It's just one of the pieces of the puzzle. So you can really see God orchestrating a lot of things happening here. I can't wait till we get the Reformation. I love the Reformation. Okay, I still got 8 minutes. Great. So the popes aren't happy with all the thinking going on. So out of the University of Bologna, a new discipline arose called canon law. In other words, we're going to lay down the law about what you can talk about and what you can't, and what you believe and what you can't, and there will be penalties. So by the end of the 14th century, they had a fully developed manual to define the rights, duties, and powers of people and priests. And that very document served the church until 1917, when a new code of canon law came out. And then there was in 1917, and then in 1983, a new one came out, the Code of Canon Law. Covers matters of fasting, feasting, communion, excommunication, and even directed intimate relations between married couples. You can go read it for yourself. The thing is, they controlled every aspect of your life. There is a law for everything, and there are penalties for everything. Well, the popes during this time also had a problem with reason and rational thought. They didn't want people thinking you're just supposed to believe what you're told. We're the authorities. You listen to us. We'll tell you what to believe, and you don't question it. But then a man came along who changed everything. He insisted that good thinking, what he argued for is, he said, good thinking will never lead people away from the truth. If it's really good thinking, it will never lead people away from the truth. And all truth is God's truth. This man's name was Thomas Aquinas. His famous work is his Summa Theologica. All that means is a summation of theology. So he distinguished between theology and philosophy, but he said they don't contradict each other. So you got theology, which is what we believe about God, and philosophy is how we think about God and why we think these ways about God. He says both come from God, both lead to God. Reason leads us to God. For example, reason can prove God's existence. He said if you just think about it, if you just put logic to it, if you put reason to it, and this is why we do apologetics, is because it is reasonable thinking to support the things that we believe. For example, he accepted Aristotle's principle that every effect has a cause. Every effect has a cause, and every cause has a prior cause. All the way back to a first cause, which is the uncaused cause. Think about that. We still use that thinking today. This is the Kalam cosmological argument, is that everything that exists at some point began to exist, and everything that begins to exist, something has to cause it to exist. So the universe began to exist. Something outside the universe had to cause it to begin to exist. And this is when, the atheist always says, yeah, but who created God? And well, he's not. He is the uncaused cause. He is the unmoved mover. He is the only eternal being because he exists outside of nature. But Aquinas argued that the full knowledge of God requires divine revelation of the Bible. So he systematized Catholic doctrine. He was the first one to articulate Catholic doctrine. Because they had these beliefs. Remember, we talked about this last time about how, they had all these traditions just springing up. And if there's these people that have this tradition that they believe or a superstition, then the priest just said, yeah, okay. That's what we're going to do because everybody believes it. And that's where a lot of these traditions within the Roman Catholic Church came from. So he taught that the church imparts the grace of Christ through the church, and that Christians need the constant infusion of cooperating grace from the church and acts of love. So this is one difference between what I would call biblical Christianity and Catholic Christianity, is Catholics believe in an infused righteousness. This means that you have to do good things in order to attain to righteousness, and the church dispenses grace and infuses righteousness into you so that at the end of your life, hopefully, you won't have to spend too much time in purgatory. Whereas we believe in a what kind of righteousness? An imputed righteousness. In other words, a righteousness, as Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, that is not our own. It's not our own righteousness. It's not a righteousness that a church gives us. It is not a righteousness that we earn. It is a righteousness from God, whereby He credits the righteousness of Christ to our account before God. He taught that the supreme sacrament is communion, and he formally articulated the doctrine of transubstantiation. Who knows what that is? That when the priest blesses the bread and the wine, that they become the body and the blood of Christ, while still retaining the properties of bread and wine. So they call that transubstantiation. Since Christians still continue to sin, penance was necessary. There are three elements to penance, according to Aquinas. Contrition, which is feeling bad. Confession, which has to be made to a priest. So glad I'm not a priest. And satisfaction, which are acts of penance, which have to cost you something. Not money necessarily, but there's some sort of pain involved. He also codified the idea of indulgences, since priests had access to the treasury of merit. Okay, I've only got 2 minutes. I'm going to stop on this. I got a lot for next week. So the treasury of merit. We believe that when Jesus died on the cross, certain things happened. One thing that happened is that He actually stood in our place and took our punishment for us. It was a vicarious punishment. He paid for our sins for us. We call this penal substitution. He was our substitute for the penalty. We also believe that in the crucifixion and the resurrection, He defeated Satan and all evil forces, and that He defeated death. Here's what the Catholics believe on the cross. They believe that the cross was such a meritorious work that it earned enough merit for everyone. So what happens is that this merit that Christ earned is stored up in heaven. And the term the Catholics use is the treasury of merit. So this merit is stored up so that when you do a good work, you go visit elderly people in a nursing home, you have accessed some of Christ's merit for yourself. And when you take communion, the church dispenses some of that merit to you, but you earn it, which is interesting to me. If Christ earned it, why do I have to earn it? But that's the way it works. So, the idea is the priest can also access that merit and give it to whomever he wills. And this is where the idea of indulgences come from. By the way, in a little while, I'm going to talk about the latest way to get indulgences. But if you make a donation, the size of your donation determines how much time out of purgatory you get knocked off your sentence. And if you make a big enough donation, you remember this whole thing with the priests exacting the money from the kings and the wealthy people? Well, here's another thing way they did it, is you paid enough money, you would get a plenary indulgence, which means all your sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. You bypass purgatory. You go straight to heaven when you die. Yes.
Did they get that in writing?
Yes. They would get a certificate. Yeah. And the thing is, though, you didn't just buy it. You had to buy it with a pure heart.
That's where they get you.
You got to have a pure heart. That's right. Thanks for coming. Y'all have a good night.